It's not going to be visible by the public, but just so that I know that it's recording. Right, let me see if this headphone works.
Stephanie, those earrings work just perfectly,
Thank you for the gift.
right?
I thought they'd be appropriate to wear this evening.
And they match the vase behind you. I know that was
Okay,
part
okay.
of the feng shui.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to start letting people into the room. And
Okay.
yep.
So Stephanie, I have to hit share screen first, right? To show my screen.
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Is my audio better now?
Yes.
Yes. So
Okay.
I hit share screen, slideshow, start slideshow,
Yes.
or something, something
Yes.
like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get it.
If you need help, I'll be right here, so I can just
Okay.
help you with yeah.
All
All right.
right.
Welcome everyone. As you slowly wait, we'll be starting in about 5 minutes. This is going to be available tomorrow on YouTube, but we'll tell you more about that in a little bit. And welcome to tonight's presentation. Okay. And yeah, Rob, if you have any questions throughout the night, just, feel free to ask.
Okay, I think once I get the screen set up and the slideshow started, I should be hopefully fine.
How are you guys holding out on the rain today?
Oh, I went out early this morning, so it wasn't too bad. But this afternoon, it just seemed nonstop. So I'm glad I did my errands early.
Yeah, all the commuting trains were out of service, I think, on the way for a rush hour.
Where were
that.
you coming from?
From going from the Upper West Side going home, so I had to go downtown and then go back uptown.
Huh,
Yeah,
not the day. Not the day. All right. Oh, my sister's there.
Oh, hey. So we can't see the people who are watching the show. Towards the end, we if you want to talk, you can raise your hand, but that's towards the Q&A. But yeah. But welcome. Thanks for coming, and we'll be starting off in about 2 minutes. So around 7:01. Is that good with you, Robert?
7:01 or 6?
7:02
Sorry,
minutes.
Oh, sorry. Well, 6:31. Sorry.
6:31. I can
Yes.
I can
We're
handle
waiting half
that.
an hour.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. See,
For those
Stephanie,
of
how
you who
come
are-
your background looks so nice and pretty and elegant?
Because I'm in this room and you're in that room.
Yeah, I guess.
For those of you who just joined us, this is the talk tonight. We'll be starting in about a minute, so please just get comfy. And yeah, we'll be starting soon. All right. Stephanie, whenever you're ready, basically.
Okay, all right, let's go for it then. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group's April presentation. I'm Stephanie Azzarone, and I'm a member of the Bloomingdale Group's Planning Committee. And on behalf of the group, thank you so much for joining us this evening, especially on this really gray, rainy day.
Miserable day.
Miserable day, yes. So we hope to brighten it up a little bit for you with tonight's presentation. A little bit about the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group before we begin. It was founded more than 20 years ago. Our mission is to discover, explore, preserve, and share the history of the Bloomingdale neighborhood, which runs from 96th Street to 110th Street, Central Park to Riverside Park. Our focus is research and education, and we achieve our goals through a series of programs that we offer the community, all of them free. Just to give you an idea of some, we have a quarterly newsletter, which is always an interesting and entertaining read. We have an ongoing series of blogs, the most recent one by a group member planning committee member Pam Tice is about bicycling in Bloomingdale way back at the end of the 19th century. It's a great fun read. We have an ongoing series of exhibits at the Bloomingdale Library. And of course, we have our walking tours conducted by Jim Mackin, who I'm totally convinced knows more about West Side history than anybody else, and is also the author of a book on local residents called Notable New Yorkers of New York's Upper West Side. And of course, we have presentations like tonight's. There is another one coming up on May 15th that is by Sarah Cedar Miller, who is the historian for Central Park, and her topic will be Before Central Park. And there is much more. For additional information about the group, we invite you to visit our website at upperwestsidehistory.org. And while there, if you like what you hear tonight, there is a donor button. We invite you to click on that to help us do what we do. Now, on to tonight's presentation. Should you have any questions for our speaker as we go along tonight, please enter them into the Q&A. And my colleague from the group, Michael Gonzalez, whom you just met, will share them with our speaker. I mentioned that the Bloomingdale neighborhood runs from 96th Street to 110th Street. Tonight, for I think the first time, we are going to travel to the north side of 110th Street, where the grounds of one of the world's largest cathedrals begin. The title of today's presentation is Voices of the Stones, a behind-the-scenes look at the unfinished tower of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. 40 years ago, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine undertook a major project to build its long overdue towers. Despite that effort, they were never completed. Thus, the church nickname St. John the Unfinished. What most people don't realize is that the partially built South Tower is host to an extraordinary array of exquisite stone sculptures. not readily visible from the street. Via a series of never-before-seen photographs, Voices of the Stones tonight will offer a unique, up-close and personal look at the wondrous, intricate, and often humorous carvings, trace them back to the dedicated men and women, stone carvers who created them, and reveal some secret messages that they carved into their limestone creations. Speaker and photojournalist Robert F. Rodriguez was artist in residence at the cathedral, spending more than 10 years documenting all facets of the construction work involved in building the towers. A photographer and photo editor at Gannett Newspapers for 38 years and the Daily Mail for 10. He was also the photographer for the book on local Upper West Side history, Heaven on the Hudson, Mansions, Monuments, and Marvels of Riverside Park.
Yes,
And-
I was.
Yes, you were. And the upcoming Fabulous Fountains of New York. His series of blogs about the cathedral's architecture may be found online at divinestone.org. And full disclosure, I'm particularly excited about tonight's presentation because Robert and I were married to each other at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. So on that personal note, Rob, over to you.
Well, thank you, dear. First, we'll start with that. And that was 41 years next month, so good for us. My documentary photo project began in 1980, and little did I realize that over 40 years later, I'd still be working on it. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if I can do this. Bear with me. Okay, I hope I have this. I recently finished digitizing hundreds of rolls of film, and I could clearly see the full body of work that I had captured. Tonight, I want to share not only some of the images, but also the stories of the stone yard. The silhouette of a half-finished tower rises above the shadows at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. An ambitious plan. Sorry.
Rob, if you can click from current slide on the top left, just so we can see it in bigger.
Is that better?
There you go.
Yes, that's
Okay,
There we go.
thank you. Thank you, Michael. So the ambitious plan to construct 2 towers and finally complete its building project faltered over 30 years ago and then stopped. The tower still reveals its elegance and a wealth of architectural details in the many carved stones on the tower. They're almost impossible to see from street level, and I want to share not only close-up images of the stonework, but also introduce you to the cutters, the carvers, and the builders responsible for them. Before we look at all the gorgeous carvings, I have to start with the capsule history of the cathedral's construction. This is what the cathedral would have looked like, but that's not what happened. Construction began in 1892, and from the beginning, the project was fraught with delays and halts in construction. The trustees held secret meetings and even considered the bishop's half-brother as the project's architect. It took over 2 years for workers to reach bedrock. Andrew Dolkart's book, Morningside Heights, devotes a full chapter to the disarray in the cathedral's creation. He sums up the situation by saying many of the problems that occurred during the initial phase of construction resulted from the overreaching nature of the entire cathedral project. With little to show in the first decade, enthusiasm waned and fundraising dried up. the trustees' grand plans often led to cost overruns and work slowdowns. A prime example was the project to erect 8 monumental columns, each weighing 130 tons and standing 54 feet, cut from a single piece of gray granite. No major work could be done for almost 2 years while engineers figured out how to upright and install these monoliths, which ultimately had to be cut into 2 sections. After the chapels, choir, and crossing dome were completed, the trustees then decided to scrap their original blueprint. What started as a Romanesque and Byzantine design by Hines and Lafarge was replaced by the more traditional Neo-Gothic style by Ralph Adams Cram. Back to the drawing board, and another significant delay in progress. A major construction cycle started in 1925 under the dynamic, and some would say Napoleonic, leadership of Bishop William Manning, which saw the building of the nave, which is the length of the cathedral, and also the west facade. It ended in 1941 with the start of World War II. After the war, any thought of resuming construction was sidelined, and eventually the cathedral earned the unflattering nickname St. John the Unfinished. This 1950 photo shows steel framing where the towers would rise, so at one point there were plans to resume building. For several decades, Episcopal administrators faced a quandary about how to restart building one of the largest Gothic cathedrals in the world. How do you justify spending millions of dollars on a grand edifice on the edge of Harlem when New York City was in decline? Enter James Parks Morton, Dean of the Cathedral from 1972 to 1976. The Dean was energetic, ecumenical, and a visionary who opened the cathedral to people of many backgrounds. During his tenure, he introduced innovative religious, social, and cultural programming. If you wanted to see elephants and camels in procession, you came to the cathedral. Dean Morton took exception to the cathedral's unflattering nickname, St. John the Unfinished, and he decided to resume building. He realized that stone carving was a dead art in America because of the evolution of modern architecture. The dean had studied architecture at Harvard and visited several cathedrals in England where construction continued in the old guild method of having a stone yard on site and with older master masons teaching younger apprentices. To continue building at the cathedral, the dean realized he had to import teachers from England to train a new generation of American stonecutters. He recruited many apprentices from Harlem and also opened up opportunities in stone to women. Starting in the 1980s, the stone yard was buzzing and St. Paul's Tower, the South Tower, started to rise. The Board of Trustees had envisioned that both towers could be completed by 1994, only 12 years after construction started. That plan to build 2 300-foot tall towers from street level stopped in the early 1990s. Funds dried up and a devastating recession hit the economy. We're going to look at those early years and see what Dean Morton and the Stone Yard apprentices did accomplish. So how do you restart after a 41-year hiatus? Dean Morton enlisted James Bambridge, who helped rebuild Great Britain's Liverpool Cathedral, which was damaged by bombing during World War II. and he also worked at Wells Cathedral. Bambridge worked from original plans, but he had to flesh out the ornamental details for the towers and create full-size templates for proper cutting and sizing of the stones. Limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, were trucked in from Indiana. The quarry that supplied them was also the source of stone for the Empire State Building, numerous state capitals, and many national landmarks. Christopher Hanaway also worked on the Liverpool Cathedral and became the stone yard's day-to-day instructor and first master mason, teaching the essentials of stone cutting to the new American apprentices. Gathering the equipment to cut and shape the stone was another major challenge. Here we see Nelson Otero with the giant planer that was a rusty hulk discovered lying near abandoned railroad tracks at the quarry. A circular saw was found in a nearby pasture. The machines were salvaged, steam cleaned, and rebuilt with parts cannibalized from similar old wrecks. The only new item needed was an 8-foot diamond tooth reciprocating saw that sliced the huge quarry blocks into manageable pieces. Dean Morton recruited 5 young people, including 2 former street gang members and 1 woman, for the first apprentice class in what was a traditionally male field, and work started in the summer of 1979. The new apprentices were Linda Peer, seen on the left with Chris Hanaway, Timothy Smith, seen working on the right, and behind them we see Jose Tapia and Manuel Alvarado. Our 5th trainee, James Jamerson, unfortunately was cut out of this photo, no fault of mine. The crew worked al fresco for a few weeks, according to Tim, before the saws and other machinery were installed and the walls of the cutting shed erected. Chris Hanaway taught the group how to use a mallet and chisel and how to boast a stone, which is applying a finishing texture to the block. Within the first year, the number of apprentices more than doubled. Alan Bird, we see him in the center, was recruited by Bambridge in 1980 to replace Chris Hanaway as the master mason. Alan worked at Wells Cathedral. His father and grandfather were both stonecutters, and Alan's son, Jason, later joined the Stoneyard program, making 4 generations of stonecutters in the family. James Jamerson on the left and Jose Tapia were among the workhorses in the early years of the Stoneyard. Both men also grew up in Harlem. Dean Morton always kept an eye on his project and proudly joined the team for a photo showing the group of racially diverse apprentices surrounded by some of the cut stones. 12,000 stones would be needed for each tower. Hard for a minute. The dean never did anything on a small scale. For the dedication ceremony to start building the tower on September 29, 1982, aerialist Philippe Petit walked across Amsterdam Avenue on a high wire. He delivered a silver trowel to Bishop Paul Moore to lay the Jerusalem stone, the cornerstone of St. Paul's Tower. The block was a gift from then Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek, which contains inscriptions in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. It was the 3rd cornerstone to be laid at the cathedral. The first was set in 1892, when construction began, and the second in 1925 for the nave. After construction started on the first courses of the tower, which did not have any carved elements, it was time to turn attention to the decorative and ornamental work. Fine carving onto the blocks that were already cut and shaped in the cutting shed. Reuben Gibson and Dallas Jeep Concannon, we'll continue to call him Jeep, were among the first to move from masonry cutting to carving. Besides both being skilled banker masons, Reuben was an estimator who determined how to best cut a large limestone block or slab with minimal waste. And Jeep had a talent for setting out, which is making the full-size zinc templates for the stone cutters based on the tower's blueprints. Among the stones to be carved were capitals, crockets on pinnacles, label stops, which we see here on the left, and the humorous and sometimes bizarre creatures on cornice stones seen on the right. Here's a view of the east elevation after a few years of building. The tower crew had almost completed the gablets. So this is a good time to give a crash course on architecture, cathedral architecture. The cornice course or string course is a horizontal band of decorative carved stones ringing all four sides of the tower. A pinnacle is often a slender vertical column ending in a finial. A buttress gablet is a decorative triangular-shaped element on the tower corners. They are filled with crockets, which are small projecting ornaments, usually set in rows and decorated with foliage. They end at the bottom with the label stop, which often shows a carved head. A gablet is a triangular-shaped design which often terminates with a finial. A finial is the cherry on the top of a gablet or pinnacle. That's enough for Architecture 101. Please take a look at the shape and design of the gablet just for a moment. And here's the gablet on the ground. Posing for a group photo in 1986, we see on the ground Al Rivera, Master Mason Alan Bird, James Jamerson, Angel Escobar, Reuben Gibson, and Frank Walcott. Above them, Sidney Linton, Jose Tapia, and Jeep Concannon. And even higher, Eddie Pizarro and Joseph Concannon. And all the way on top, Nicholas Fairplay doing his best imitation of a finial. One of my favorite images. Now we get to the fun part. I find something sacred and spiritual about this photo. Crew Chief Edgar Reyes on the left directs the action while Yves Pierre lowers the chain on this gablet apex finial. The carving, done by Jeep Concannon, depicts Saint Phoebe, a 1st century deaconess at the church of Cenchreae at the port of Corinth in Greece. Now I want to take you back to the carving shed where this creation came to be and introduce you to the artist. But first, this is one of the few photographs I have of me documenting the stone yard. I always stayed behind the camera, so I'm grateful for this photo. Jeep is seen on the right taking his own photo. Preliminary drawings were essential, and it's easy to see the artistry in Jeep's sketches. His exacting work and carving skills are seen in the details not only of the figure, the veil, and the chalice, but also in the foliage below her. Here's a full view of a buttress gablet on the east face, showing the label stop carvings at the bottom. I photographed many of the carvings while they were still on the ground to get a better perspective. The top grotesque was carved by Nicholas Fairplay, and the lower one by Joseph Kincannon. Dean Morton once commented on the carvings. One of the things they captured was carving with a sense of humor, and he certainly was right. Before heading to the carving shed for the creative and artistic finish, we see apprentice stonecutter Lisa Young shaping a label stop according to the specs. After graduating from Pratt Institute, Cynthia "Cinny" Linton received a grant to study in France and Spain, where she drew inspiration from Romanesque church and cloister carvings. One of her stops was Santiago de Compostela, a Christian pilgrimage site in northwestern Spain. Following her sketches, Cindy made a clay model of a pilgrim on his journey. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Working with the clay model helps the carver visualize the depth and dimensions of the stone before carving. Working with clay is an additive process, while carving the stone a subtractive one. She then consulted with Nicholas Fairplay, the lead carver and instructor, on any adjustments needed. The small photo on the right shows a scallop shell on the pilgrim's hat. The symbol of the shell guided pilgrims along the Camino, while the shell represented the way to the cathedral. The scallop shell became a symbol of pilgrimage and a reminder of the power of faith. This is one of my favorite images from photographing the stone yard for over 10 years. The young artist, intent on her work and almost seeing a mirror image in her carving. After the buttress gablets were set in place, I had Cindy pose with her work. Her carving inspired me to visit Santiago de Compostela, and someday soon I hope to walk it or bike it. Can't wait. And I have my shell, so I'm all set. I clearly remember the mood in the carving shed was tranquil and peaceful, with classical music softly playing in the background when Reuben Gibson became lead carver. A New York Times article best explains Reuben's various carvings. The supple stone faces of Mr. Gibson's demons, lions, and imps seem alive, some as if about to grin or grimace. The lustrous curls in lions' manes look as if they should flutter in the wind off the Hudson River. But Reuben was also opinionated and passionate and clashed with the church hierarchy over his desire to hire more minority stonecutters. One of Reuben's carvings depicts an impish face with a large nose and tongue sticking out. Not coincidentally, the face looks out towards Dean Morton's office, whose policies Reuben sometimes disagreed with. So Reuben's grotesque will be on the tower for eternity with its ire directed at the dean. I just learned something new about this carving. Nick Fairplay told me that he told Ruben that in Germany it is common to carve a gargoyle with its bottom, with its rear end, facing the dean's house. Well, maybe Ruben liked that idea, but decided maybe not to go that route. So I'm glad that we only have the tongue sticking out here and not some other body part. Dean Morton was a consummate showman, often bringing patrons and supporters to the Stoneyard and the tower to see the work in progress, and I wanted to do his portrait in that environment. Joseph Concannon was the carver of this amusing creature. Joseph recently provided background to this fingers in the ears gesture. He said, the Stoneyard was struggling at the time. If memory serves, there were a lot of layoffs, a management shakeup, accompanied by many painful meetings. Joseph kept his head down and kept on working. He didn't want to hear it. But there was also another reason for the gesture, he explains. The carving is pointed in the direction of my mother's apartment building, Broadway and 111th Street. And she can be a little long-winded. The gift of the gab runs in the family, he said, so this was an inside joke. Hence, the inspiration for this ugly little head is twofold. Joseph had another secret hidden in this carving of a wide-mouthed grotesque. You have to look closely at the sketch and specifically the point between his hammer and chisel. Here's the label stop on the south front, but we really have to zoom in to see the surprise. Joseph carved a face peeking out from deep inside the gaping mouth. I think it's really spectacular. The photo on the left shows the line of carved crockets ending in the label stop of a green man carved by Joseph's brother, Jeep. The Green Man is an ancient mythological character later adopted by Gothic stone carvers and seen in countless churches and cathedrals all over Europe. In Celtic mythology, the Green Man represents the Lord of the Forest and the patron of animals and fertility. He is mainly a symbol of untamed nature. Before the planks were removed from this level on the tower, I met up with Jeep to have him pose with his work. Jeep may have chosen another mythic figure as inspiration for this carving of a creature with ram's horns. His carving could represent the horns of the Egyptian deity Ammon, or it could be Pan from Greek mythology. I can't be sure which one Jeep chose, but deities depicted with horns are found in many religions and carved on many churches. I call this carving by Jeep the Mighty Mite. He's working in a tight, limited space on the end of the label stop, but he still manages to carve a creature with pointy elf ears, curly hair, and really awesome muscles. By the summer of 1988, the first two zones on St. Paul's Tower were completed, and the spire was now taller than the peaked roof of the cathedral. The first layer of blocks on the C zone was called the cornice, or string course, the level with the greatest array of carvings on the tower. The limestone blocks measured about 3 feet wide and weighed over 800 pounds. A few years earlier, in the cutting shed, we see Eddie Pizarro smooth out an inside curve on a cornice stone. The protruding flat section on the right is where the carvers will work. Eddie, an affable and gregarious presence in the stone yard, worked his way up the. He completed his apprenticeship, became a journeyman, and later master mason. But because of his skills with machinery, he later became stone yard manager. Here we see construction supervisor Stephen Boyle on the left laying down a bed of mud or mortar to set a cornice stone on the tower's south side. This block was carved by Angel Escobar. But first, a word about Stephen. He apprenticed at York Minster Cathedral doing restoration work. He later became a journeyman stonemason when he was involved in restoration and construction at Salisbury Cathedral in England and Burrell Museum in Scotland. At the cathedral, Stephen was the foreman most responsible for setting the stones on the tower. Now back to Angel. Angel Escobar was a high school dropout who says his life had been saved by the Stone Yard program. He completed his 4-year apprenticeship and moved from the cutting shed to the carving shed, where he liked to carve fantastic creatures. On the wall behind him, you can see the evolution of his design sketches. Forest motifs were popular in cathedral architecture, and I love Angel's interpretation of a flower creature emerging from inside the petals. And now you can see that carving once it was set on the tower. So here's another look at some of the carvings on the tower's east side, but I want to focus on the carved face on the far right. We've already seen Jeep's Green Man carving. Here, Jessica O'Hara Lowry set out not only to carve a green woman, but also to make it a self-portrait. She recently told me this was her first carving at the Stone Yard. After making several sketches, she worked on her clay model. So when she started to carve, she kept a mirror nearby for reference. That makes sense. But not content with that, she also kept her clay model behind the mirror. But to be extra sure of capturing her image properly, she added the sketch behind the clay model, behind the mirror, behind the carving. She got it. This is a dark and haunting carving of the Angel of Death done by Amy Breyer. She told me, I like the human skull. It could also be connected to my mother dying a few months before I started working at the cathedral. I was thinking about mortality and death. I was also influenced by Gothic depictions of the devil, evil, and death. Since leaving the cathedral, Amy has continued with stone carving. She became the executive director of the Indiana Limestone Symposium and teaches at Ivy Tech Community College in Bloomington, Indiana. I have to make a detour here to show Amy working on an apex finial carving that never made it to the tower when work stopped. Now it sits in a heap with a few hundred stones around the cathedral. We're hoping to create a park and memorial garden on the grounds sometime this year. If anyone has a forklift and telescoping boom, please see me after this. The carving on the far right by Nicholas Fairplay shows a creature using his one giant foot to shade his face. Monopods are mythological human creatures with a single large foot extending from a leg centered in the middle of their bodies. The Greeks call them shade-footed ones because when it was hot, they would lie on their backs on the ground and be shaded by the great size of their foot. Nick worked at Westminster Abbey and came to the cathedral as head carver to teach carving to the most promising cutters in the apprentice program. These several carvings of the monopod and different forest creatures show his versatility and skill. Nick's major work during his time at the cathedral was a 9.5-foot tall, 3-ton carving of the biblical prophet Elijah, which was destined for a niche between the towers overlooking the cathedral's west front. So I have to make another detour here to tell you what happened to that statue. I think this familiar photo sums it up. There was a devastating fire in the cathedral in 2001, which threatened the stained glass windows, seriously damaged the organ, and covered the interior with soot. Elijah was stored in the crypt and largely forgotten. Stone carver alumnus Chris Pelletieri and I were visiting the crypt last year, and we uncovered its location. We're hoping to return it to a spot inside the cathedral sometime soon. Now, who wouldn't love to have those curly ringlets? Add the flowing beard and mustache in this carving by Joseph Kincannon, and to me, it resembles the king on a deck of playing cards. Here's a closer look once the stone was set. Joseph was one of the longest-serving workers at the cathedral. Afterwards, he and his brother started a stoneworking studio in Texas. Joseph is now chair of the American College of Building Arts in Charleston, South Carolina. While most of the cornerstones were wide and had the carvings to one side, some were only wide enough just to fit on the block. In this case, we see a half-man creature with a long tail and 3 long toes, also done by Joseph. Stephen Boyle says this stone is a centerpiece, which allows all the carvings to be evenly spaced. Stephen dug up a blueprint to show the line of cornerstones, and stone 13 in the center is where Joseph's carving was placed. These corner carvings are impossible to see from street level. They're located on the north side, which faces the cathedral's roof. From left, the stones were carved by Reuben Gibson, Jeep Kincannon, and Amy Breyer, but we'll focus on the middle carvings done by Jeep. Jeep was meticulous and could carve deeply into a block to create depth and dimensionality. The photo shows him starting to carve, using his clay model as his guide, to carve a lion creature with puffy cheeks, flowing mustache, and gnarly teeth. Now we're going to the opposite side of the north face. Carving of the female figure at left was created by Gabrielle Hittel-Cohn, the winged dragon in the center by Jeep, and the lion figure on the far right by Nicholas Fairplay. Here you get a closer look at the contours of the dragon's wings and how Jeep used every inch of the block to carve this piece. This image shows the cornice course does not run in a single straight line. It juts out to meet the corner buttresses that strengthen the tower. We'll look at the carving to the right, done by Dennis Reed. Dennis said his apprenticeship at the Stoneyard opened me up to a world of God, passion, people, and possibilities. But Dennis, who was raised in Harlem, wrestled with his demons, the murder of his brother and a cocaine habit. One time he broke into a collection box at the cathedral with his masonry hammer. Fortunately, officials got him into rehab. Dennis compared the stonework at the tower to a temple that constantly needs to be worked on. It's a metaphor for spiritual life, he said. His moon-faced man, as I call it, with its rounded face, strong, compact hands, and a small figure precariously hanging on, overlooks busy Amsterdam Avenue and the Hudson River on the tower's west front. Here's another view of the work on the west face, but this time I want to examine the carving on the left, created by Reuben Gibson. It is a mysterious and eerie work. A demon, a tormented figure, a beast, appears to be emerging from the raw cornice stone. Reuben worked on this piece until he became too weak to handle a mallet and chisel. Later that year, in 1988, Reuben passed away from AIDS. His carving team felt it would be a fitting tribute to their lead carver to set the stone as it was. The carving's transformation halted by the creator's death. Looking back now across so many years, I find it fitting to have his unfinished work on this unfinished tower. There you have it. Stephanie, back to you. Michael?
There we go. Can you see me?
All right.
Yes.
Well,
All right.
thank you, Robert. I may be a little bit biased, but I thought it was pretty fabulous. I can't decide which figure I liked the most, whether it was the one with his tongue sticking out or with his fingers in his ears, or maybe it was the
Okay.
monopod. It's a really, really tough
Too
job.
many wonderful choices.
Really
Yes,
wonderful
I
choices.
agree.
It's true.
Yeah, I think my favorite picture was the one of the artist referencing the Clay referencing the drawing.
Oh,
Referencing
Jessica,
the
yeah,
error.
that's one of my
Yeah.
favorites.
Right. So, Mike, do we have any questions for Robert?
Yes. So we do have a few questions, and I want to remind people that if they raise their hands, I will give them an opportunity to talk. So I'll start with the first raised hand, and then we'll go into the questions. So let me see. Okay, we'll go into two. We'll go three raised hands, and then we'll go into questions. So there we go. Peter, go ahead.
Hi, I really appreciated this. I watched the carving on the front of the cathedral in the little niches, and they all seem to have sort of a long face. And there was a guy that I got his name back then, but I can't remember any longer. He was sort of small, and I think he was Welsh. And
That's probably Simon Verity, but that's another project. That's the
Okay.
Portal of Paradise.
Okay. And
That's that happened in conjunction with the tower, but my focus tonight and my focus was pretty much on the tower and the construction going on there.
Thank you, though. The whole presentation was excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, Carmine or Carmi.
Carmine.
Yeah. Now you should be able to talk now.
I think Carmine is.
Can you hear me?
there. I can
you hear
hear
me?
you.
There we go.
Okay. Rob, I want to firstly congratulate you. This was so terrific. And I'm so glad to finally see it finished. We've talked about it over many cups of coffee
We
and
have.
bagels, but it exceeded my expectations. And I'm proud of you and for you. So thanks. It was great.
Thank you, Carmine.
Okay. So now we'll go into the questions. And actually, we have one last raised hand. Marcia, let's see. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Mute. Okay, it's a different system. I was not familiar. I just wanted to say I've been at the cathedral since '72. It's where I worship, and I lived through all of this. I didn't know many of the stonecutters very well, but I knew Dennis very well, and I remember Joseph and it was just a lovely, lovely time, and it was wonderful to.
It was special.
It was
Very
very
special
special,
time.
and I appreciate you making this presentation and bringing it all back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll go to the questions. So the first question is, do you know how long it typically took to create one of the carved stones?
It really depends upon the complexity of it. If it's still up on the screen, this little dragon is no more than maybe 6 inches, and it may have taken a few days. It's not just the carving. It goes back to the planning, the design, in many cases, making a clay model and the sketches, and then transferring from the clay model to various points on the cut stone. It could take a few weeks, I would say, at the very least.
So the next question would be, do you know why the Stoneyard work ended and how?
It was pretty much a lack of money, unfortunately. There were attempts to open up a whole venue of just construction to raise funds for it, but that unfortunately never happened. I think what really knocked it out was the recession in 86, 88. We were all in a bad way for a good 5-6 years after that.
Do you know what year they stopped the work on the tower and the facade?
The tower stopped around 1990. I think there were plans or hopes to restart it at some point, but that just never came to be. And the scaffolding remained up for almost 10 years, over 10 years.
So someone asked about the columns. Do you know who designed the large ones in the front?
I'm sorry, the columns?
Yes, the large columns in the front. Do you know who designed those?
I'm not sure I know which columns we're talking about here.
Let's see. Lois asked the question. I was just mentioning about large columns, didn't go more specific than that.
The columns, I mean, the columns were, at least what I had mentioned earlier, were columns inside the cathedral in the choir area, but no, I can't say. I don't know.
Okay. Next question here is, do you happen to know where the stones were quarried from?
I believe it's from Indiana. There is a quarry called the Empire Quarry, and I think Stephanie will agree. We're planning to go there later this month. We're meeting up with one of the stone carvers, Amy Breyer, who lives nearby, and she promises to take me there. I'm not sure if it's still in operation or not, but we're going to check it out.
Okay.
It's
I have
near
one.
I'm sorry, it's near
Okay.
Bloomington, Indiana. That I can
Got
tell
it.
you.
I have an Ira Garber who I'm going to say something. Go ahead, Ira. Should be able to unmute.
Robert,
Hello,
this was
Ira.
Robert. Hi, congratulations. This was beautifully presented, and I love getting to meet some of the carving team. Your photos are really quite nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In the background of a lot of the photos were drawings done by these people who
Yes.
some had more training than others. Is there any provision for archiving and presenting the drawings that accompany this, especially since some of the stonework that these drawings are based on is no longer on the ground? You can't see them, but it'd be beautiful to see a collection of some of the drawings.
I would have to ask the individual stone cutters and stone carvers who I've been in touch with, whether they've kept them or not. I can get back to you on that. It's true. I mean, those are gorgeous to see.
Yeah.
And I hope that some of them did put them in their portfolios to preserve them.
Good.
Okay, the next question here we have is, do you know what happened to the stonemasons after the project was suspended? Or have you been in touch with any of them after?
I've been in touch with quite a few of them, thankfully. And in the past few weeks, I've had conversations with several. Many of them went on to other things. Joseph, Amy, Chris Pelletieri, and a few others stayed in stone carving. And I think that's in large part the influence of the cathedral stone cutting program.
Got it. So with all the sculptures that were never meant to be seen, do you know where they ended up? Are they still in the archives, or do you know if they went anywhere else?
There are a lot of stones on the cathedral grounds, and there's some beautiful carvings there of pinnacles and beautiful carved stones. That's about all I can tell you.
Let's see. Next question here is, back in the 1980s, we neighbors heard the plan was to complete the towers when there was a peace in the world. Is there any truth to this?
I'm sorry, Michael, can you repeat that?
Yep. Back in the 1980s, we neighbors around, oh, let me find this. Give me a second. We neighbors heard the plan was to complete the towers when there was peace in the world. Is there any truth to this?
Oh, no, that I can't say. I mean, I think they wanted to get these towers up. They wanted to build them. If we were waiting for peace in the world, we'd still be waiting, and we are still waiting.
And then a personal question is, how did you ascend these pictures, locations that you took? Were you by scaffolding, by elevator? And how did you continue to the highest point as the work proceeded?
The entire tower was, scaffolding was erected all around, and there was an elevator, a lift that brought personnel and stones to whatever level they were working at the time. They put planks out, and it was rather precarious being out there. There was a little bit of safety netting, but I can tell you these days, I probably would not have had that same access. Everyone there would probably need safety harnesses, and OSHA would be there every week. I could just take the lift up, see what was going on, check in, photograph, and do my photo work. Very different time.
Another question from the chat was, do you know how these stones were placed into their final resting spots? Were they carved on, like how much of it was carved on the ground or at studio? And how
Okay,
much of it was?
it was primarily carved in the carving shed and the cutting sheds. I believe Jeep Concannon was designated as an on-site carver. If anything needed to be adjusted, he would do that. But all the stones were shaped down below before they came up to the tower where they were set.
Got it. Do you know how much of the work was completed before this was stopped?
I believe about 50 or 60 feet of the tower was built, and they were maybe halfway to the first tower, and unfortunately that was it.
Got it. Is it true that the Italian master carvers were invited over to train young apprentices from Harlem, and were those workers paid if they were?
Italian carvers?
Yeah, it says Italian master carvers is what I'm reading.
The trainers, the teachers came from England. Now we're talking about Jim Bambridge, Chris Hanaway, Alan Bird, Nick Fairplay. The Italian carvers were a generation earlier. A lot of them worked inside the cathedral during the Bishop Manning period from 1925 to 1941. But primarily, I'm going to say, the carvers the imports came from England for this round of construction. There were a few other carvers from France later on, but no Italian carvers that I'm aware of.
Got it. Second to last question here is, going back to the columns in the front, it was more of a reference to the statues around the door. Do you know who carved those?
I believe what we're talking about, the central portal, and those are called the Portal of Paradise. That project started around 1988. The principal carver was Simon Verity, and many of the cathedral carvers did participate in that.
Got it.
And that was finished because I believe they had a number of grants to do so.
Last question I have here is, were there any significant or notable accidents during this construction?
Not that I'm aware of. I one time dropped a lens on someone when I was on top of the tower, but I don't think anyone reported that, and no one got hurt.
Okay. Again, if anyone has any questions or wants to say anything else, feel free to put it in the chat. But if not, thank you, Robert, for this amazing presentation. And then I will also be putting the link for the presentation where the recording will be posted, so you can find it tomorrow morning. There it is.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Robert. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Good
Thank you
night.
so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, Michael. Are you still there?
Robert, thank you. This is Peter Arnson.
Yes.
Just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been great.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. This was a lot of time and a lot of work gone into it, but this has been a labor of love of mine for so many years.
I really
All right.
appreciate how you highlighted the carvers. Sorry, Michael.
No worries. All right. I'm going to end the presentation.